Welcome to Just an Average Citizen, the podcast that helps to educate, inform, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. Happy New Year! I'm glad you're here to join me today for Book by the Bite. We know that this is a little different episode that I'm doing through the week to be able to offer you some insight to some books that I've read or think you should read. And we don't always have time to read, but I want you to be able to hear some insight and information that I think is really good to help us move forward in a better understanding of our culture that we're living in. I'm so grateful you decided to join me for this episode. I would love it if you'd subscribe and share this with your friends and family, whatever platform you choose to listen on. There's so many different ones to choose from, thanks to my awesome husband. So thank you for sharing that and helping get the word out. Now, this one I'm excited to do. I've been trying to find the right book to kick off the year for you this year. And it really was a struggle for me because there's so many great options. And I was just processing, where does wisdom come from? And so you can see that The Quest for Cosmic Justice is the book we're going to be talking about for this episode. And one more, because I couldn't squeeze it all into one episode. But I think the reason why this really resonated with me is I was just thinking and reflecting on the fact that, who gives us the source of wisdom? Well, it's God. And where do we get his wisdom from? Well, we get it from the Word of God, which is the Bible. And so as I've read the Bible more and more and gotten that to be more of a significant part of my life, I've found that it really helps me filter the rest of the information with so much clarity and direction that I just had to put a little plug in there to make sure you're positioning yourself to be able to receive such great and impactful wisdom from his Word. So I know many people love to read through the Bible each year. And so this is my Bible. It's the Founder's Bible, and I'm so excited about it. I have been using the English Standard Version and decided that I needed a new translation to really study from. And so I'll be using the New American Standard Bible to study from this year. And, reading it is sometimes overwhelming. I mean, there's 66 books. It crosses a multitude of generations and lives and cultures and all those things. It's written in different languages. Where do we get started? And so I just wanted to give you a couple of tips to help you find your way to navigate through it so it becomes a daily and regular part of your world as you read the Bible. The first thing I want to show you is the Daily Audio Bible. Now, this is someone recommended it to me several years ago, and I thought I'll give it a whirl. And I had done different ways of studying the Bible, but this one I started off in January. And I was so grateful for it because it really helped me get on a good habit of listening to it daily. I love that you can also read along if you want to while you're listening. And there's different options. You can read through it like it's listed in the table of contents, or you can read it chronologically. And I have found that I have read through the Bible so much. I know the order of the Bible, but I really want to know how it fits into the timeline of history and all that stuff. So that's been my go-to. Another guide that I have found very helpful. I actually ran across it while I was at a birthday weekend for my friend, and another lady was studying this, and I thought, oh, that looks good. And so I checked it out, and I've been now doing this for 3 years. I actually started it in June and finished in December because I am a nerd that way. But I really love the perspective Tara Lee Cobble has on how she orients everything she reads through the character of God. And I think that's something we are lacking in our society, how we don't put ourselves in the center of the story, but we put God in the center of the story. And every day she ends it with, because he is where the joy is. And I love that. And so, we're not going to find any commentary or any guide that we read through that we will find 100% agreement on all things. But I think there's so much to be offered or received from this guide that I can't help but encourage it. In fact, I've bought it for all of my family and enjoy reading it just to kind of reorient myself. Now, she does have a podcast you can listen to if you don't want to read her Bible recap. There is an Audible, and you actually can do it on the Bible app if you want to. And I like that because it gives some great videos from the Bible Project. I think that's what it's called, that allows you to get the overview of each chapter. And so there's a lot of great resources from this guide alone. So hopefully that gives you some help in putting the Word of God center. I think it's really interesting. We have trouble with really getting into the Word of God. I mean, because for so long, we've been told that we don't have the authority to understand all things, and we need to look to others to find this information or find information and learn from people. But I hope that if anything that COVID has taught us is that we actually have God has given us the mind of Christ, and so we can learn and understand things if we ask Him for it. He says in James, He generously gives wisdom to those who seek it. And so I think that us learning how to take ownership of how we read through the Bible and understand it and find ways to, which I totally forgot. That leads me to my next book that I wanted to share with you, is How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. I started reading this one on a recommendation. I think it was from Theology Mom podcast a couple years ago. And so I've read through this multiple times, and I have just found this to be such a great way to get a big picture of what we're actually doing, what we're studying, how to understand the hermeneutics, and all those fancy words that I never really thought I needed to care about. And so I think it's good to understand context and what we apply to now and what we read with the understanding that was written for a people of another generation. Anyway, this book is great, and I can't recommend it enough. I found listening to it a lot easier. It's a little thick, but I was one of those people that just read books for the fiction. I just read fiction books. I love stories. I love romance. I loved historical fiction. I loved all that. And what I found is it really kind of dumbs you down. There's some meritable things you can get from reading fictional books, but we have not given ourselves the challenge to read harder things. And, I really got put in my place when I ordered from Wall Builders, I think it was Wall Builders, the Elementary Catechisms of the Constitution. And it was written for elementary students, and I didn't know the information, nor could I hardly read through and work through it. And I thought, oh my God, we have allowed our brains to become so mushy. We need to start exercising them to be able to engage better in what we read. And so I will say the Bible is a great source to get started with that, partially too, because then, there has been a huge push to get social justice integrated into the church living. And I think you'll understand from reading this book today or walking through this book that it has been very problematic and has caused a lot of problems. And so if we don't take ownership of really going to the source and understanding what's going on rather than just listening and receiving information, we can really end up in a bad place ourselves, which, like I said, I think COVID woke us all up to most of that, our authorities are just human, and we've got to learn to be able to have resources and places we can turn to make sure that what we are hearing from them is true and is trustworthy. And we're in a season where what a gift that we've been woken up to be able to understand we have such a powerful weapon, and that is our ability to read resources and look for information up and not just take anything at face value. So, so let's move on to now the actual book. I'm really excited. What's interesting is during COVID, we had lots of free time on our hands. And so I happened to stumble across a gentleman in California who was an adjunct professor, I think philosophy. And he mentioned Thomas Sowell. And I was like, I've never heard of this man. And then I stumbled upon something Candace Owens was talking about, and she mentioned Thomas Sowell. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to look at it. So finally, when Allie Beth Stuckey from Relatable mentioned reading this book as a very pivotal and important book to read, I was like, okay, I'm going for it. So I looked up The Quest for Cosmic Justice by Thomas Sowell. He worked for Stanford. He is one of those people that is such a great source of wisdom and very prolific. Like, I'm reading his stuff going, this was written decades ago, and it's so applicable till today's era. And so what I want to do is, this is a book that he wrote. Actually, he wrote 4 essays, and he kind of put them together, and it's amazing how they work. The first of the essays we're going to work through is The Quest for Comic Justice. Then the next essay is The Mirage of Equality. Then we have The Tyranny of Vision, and The Quiet Repeal of the American Revolution. And so I'm going to break these up into 2 essays each one so that we can make sure that I don't put you to sleep, because man, there's such great stuff. I want you to catch it. And I may be the nerd, but I'm going to drag you into my nerdiness and get you to appreciate what value there is in some great resources we have at our fingertips. All right. So the preface of this book has a really great quote that I thought was great to start off with. General principles such as justice or equality are often passionately invoked in the course of arguing about issues of the day. But such terms usually go undefined and unexamined. Often much more can be gained by scrutinizing what we ourselves mean by such notions than trying to convince or overwhelm others. If we understood what we were really saying, in many cases we would not say it, or if we did, we might have a better chance of making our reasons understood by those who disagree with us. I love that. Valuing that we are speaking something of worth that needs to be said rather than just bloviating for the fun of it. And I'm one that loves to talk. So I have to make sure that what I offer is substance and not just lots of words. I think this is also an interesting point to start off with. Well, that was the preface of what we were reading, what we're getting these started. And you know what I love, if you read this book, he says someone challenged him in his presentation he made over this first particular essay, the Quest for Comic Justice. And in a way, he was trying to get back at the person and kind of show them he knew what he was talking about. And anyway, it's really fun how it came together. And so I'm thankful that he was rebuffed and accepted the challenge to move into something greater. Okay, so here we are in the Quest for Comic Justice, and it says, whatever moral principle each of us believes in, we call justice. So we are only talking in a circle when we say we advocate justice, unless we specify just what conception of justice we have in mind. This is especially so today, when so many advocate for what they call social justice, often with great passion but with no definition. All justice is inherently social. Can someone on a desert island be either just or unjust? It's kind of like if a tree falls in a forest, is anyone here? So I think that's a great question that we need to address. The absence of personal intention in a spontaneous order, a cosmos, as Hayek defined it, means an absence of either justice or injustice. Nature can neither be just or unjust, he said. Only if we mean to blame a personal creator does it make sense to describe it as unjust that somebody has been born with a physical defect, or been stricken with disease, or has suffered the loss of a loved one. Others who share a similarly secular view are often driven to personify society in order to reintroduce concepts of moral responsibility and justice into the cosmos, seeking to rectify the tragic misfortunes of individuals and groups through collective action in the name of social justice. So again, if you're going to use morality, you have to have some kind of measuring mark, and it points back to our Creator. And I think that's so, like we don't even have to work that hard to show the nature of God in our world, because his thumbprint, it's everywhere, including, he says that we have to introduce concepts of morality. You have to put them with social society in order to remove that aspect of God. But God is the source of morality, and he gives us that. He's the source of justice. I mean, goodness gracious, he is a great picture of justice. I think, when we want justice, but thankfully God allows his perfect justice to fulfill the law, which required a sacrifice on our behalf in order to be able to be freed from the sin nature that we were born into. And if he was not justice, then Jesus would not have been able to fulfill that. If he didn't care about us, he would have just let us go on without ever being able to satisfy the law. And so I'm thankful for his justice for sure. Okay. So in other words, it seeks to mitigate and make more just the undeserved misfortunes arising from the cosmos, as well as from society. It seeks to produce cosmic justice going beyond strictly social justice, which becomes just one aspect of cosmic justice. So, cosmic justice, we'll see, is not good. It's a good idea. Like the idea of me never having to work again sounds awesome. But we know that God places a desire to work and to be productive, right? And so we don't ever want to live in a place where we're not working. We want to live in a place where our work matters. But just like cosmic justice, it really cannot be satisfied in our society ever. It's just an idea that sounds good, but is ineffective. Let's see here. What am I on? Trying to get in a good place here. Yeah. Okay. Let's go this next quote here. Milton Friedman says, a society that puts equality in the sense of equality of outcome ahead of freedom will end up with neither equality nor freedom. The use of force to achieve equality will destroy freedom, and the force, introduced for good purposes, will end up in the hands of people who use it to promote their own interest. So we can't put equality ahead of freedom because we're not going to have it. Now, I like this. This is a story, so I have this in here to remind me of the story that in 1996, this illustrates some of the costs of correcting some kind of inequalities and injustices. In San Francisco, in 1996, a relative of one of the city supervisors telephoned a pizza company to have a pizza delivered to his home. He was told the company didn't deliver pizza where he lived, which happened to be a high-crime neighborhood. Immediately, there was an outburst of moral indignation. A law was passed decreeing that anyone who makes deliveries in the public in any part of the city must make deliveries all over the city. In a simple example, we have all the elements of the quest of cosmic justice. Since most people are not criminals, not even in the high-crime neighborhood, large numbers of innocent people have various additional costs imposed on them through no fault of their own. In this case, the cost of being able to receive deliveries of food, furniture, packages, and other things that people take for granted elsewhere. They're treated unequally. From a cosmic perspective, this is an injustice in the sense that if we were creating a universe from scratch, this is not something most of us would choose to include into it. However, unlike God at the dawn of creation, we cannot simply say, let there be equality or let there be justice. We must begin with the universe that we were born into and weigh the cost of making any specific change to achieve it in a specific end. We cannot simply do something whenever we are morally indignant while disdaining to consider the cost entailed. In this case, the increased cost would include dead truck drivers. In American high-crime neighborhoods, the probability that a given young man living there will be killed is greater than the probability that a given American soldier would be killed in World War II. Well, the odds may not be as great for someone making deliveries there. They may also not be negligible, nor should we ignore the possibility that an outsider might attract more attention, resentment, and result in greater risks. So again, just because we see inequality, we do not have the ability to go, okay, let's remove it. We have to look at the costs. Across a wide spectrum of issues, the difference between seeking cosmic justice and seeking traditional justice depends on the extent to which costs are weighed. The enormous difference that this can make needs to be made explicit so that we do not keep talking past one another on something as important as justice. Cosmic justice is not simply a higher degree of traditional justice, it is a fundamentally different concept. Traditionally, justice or injustice is a characteristic of a process. A defendant in a criminal case would have said to receive justice if the trial were conducted as it should be, under fair rules and with the judge and jury being impartial. After such trial, it could be said that justice was done regardless of what the outcome was, an acquittal or execution. So traditional justice looks to the process, cosmic justice looks to the outcome, right? And that's what it just says right there. Okay, so in fact, rules and standards equally apply to all are often deliberately set aside in pursuit of social justice, nor are such exemptions aberrations. The two concepts are mutually incompatible. Rules and social justice are incompatible. All right, what social justice seeks to do is eliminate undeserved disadvantages for selected groups. As in the San Francisco pizza delivery case, this is often done in disregard of the cost of this to other individuals or groups, even when the requirements of society as a whole. In pursuit of justice for a segment of society, in disregard of the consequences for society as a whole, what is called social justice might be more accurately be called anti-social justice, since what consistently gets ignored or dismissed are precisely the cost to society. Okay? So, we can look at the OJ trial as an example. He was the evidence was overwhelmingly that he was guilty, but he sat for a year waiting to have trial. And, this is that antisocial justice that comes from pursuing this cosmic justice, because even guilty people are allowed to have way more leniency and way more stuff given to them. And we can go into the why that is, but this is more about just the idea of justice. A significant amount of violent crimes committed in America is committed by career criminals who are walking the streets and stalking the innocent while awaiting trial. This, too, is one of the costs of quest for cosmic justice. We know, we've heard of it. People are, murderers are being arrested and then let out with no bail until their trial. And then a lot of times, those same people are committing more crimes while they're out on bail for a crime they already committed. And it's just tragic what the society has to pay because these DAs and these people in charge have decided that it's better to let these people be free than to require them to make payment or to be accountable for their actions until they're proven guilty or innocent. All right. Now I've lost my place. I moved my hand. All right. So now we're at In other words, having everyone play by the same rules or be judged by the same standards is merely formal equality. In Professor Rawls' view, while truly fair equality of opportunity means providing everyone with equal prospects of success from equal individual efforts. Note how word fair has an entirely different meaning in the context. Cosmic justice is not about the rules of the game. It is about putting particular segments of society in the position they would have been in but for some undeserved misfortune. The conception of fairness requires that third parties must wield the power to control outcomes, overriding rules, standards, or the preferences of other people. Though through no fault of their own, one of the key phrases of the quest of cosmic justice. All right. In particular, it's all too easy to be overwhelmed by clear and tragic historic injustices and to glide easily from those injustices to cause and effect explanation of contemporary problems. We know, of course, that causation and morality are two different things. Too often, however, we proceed as if we did not recognize this distinction. Okay? And so then he goes into talk about marriages and how we know that, it wasn't because of the civil rights movement that marriages failed. It wasn't because of their circumstances that failed. Something like the nuclear family failed. They were doing good without the freedom. They were doing, there wasn't a problem in the nuclear family before they were set free from all the Jim Crow laws and all the historic racist and unjust laws. So there's got to be something more that has changed when the 1964 civil rights movement started, and it destroyed the family. And it is destroying all families. Mainly the black and white community families. I don't think it's had as a great effect on the Asian families, and maybe not the Hispanic families. But I mean, it is the ripple effect of trying to proceed with this cosmic justice. Now, don't get lost in the weeds. I'm not saying that the 1964 laws were bad or the civil rights laws were bad, because they needed to be changed and there were some injustices definitely needed to be righted. But it went so far that now it's created a whole nother problem that we're still reeling from that wasn't present before when that was enacted. Okay. So let's see here. We are on. We can all understand in principle that even great historic evil does not automatically explain all the subsequent evils, but we often proceed in practice as if we did not understand that. Cancer can be fatal, but it does not explain all fatalities or even most fatalities. So I think that's great that we can't apply everything across the board. We have to look and see what examples and what situations we're looking at without moving forward too far. Okay. Here we go. The demands of cosmic justice vastly exceed those of traditional justice and vastly exceed what human beings are likely to be capable of. The great U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said that there may be some people who are simply born clumsy, so they may advertently injure themselves or others, for which presumably they will not be blamed when they stand before the courts of heaven. But in the courts of man, they must be held to the same standards of accountability as everyone else. We do not have the omniscience to know who these particular people are or to what extent they were capable of taking extra precautions to guard against their own natural tendencies. In other words, human courts should not presume to dispense cosmic justice. Cosmic justice is not for us to do. It's not sustainable in our world. Okay? Among other things, there were extended arguments over all sorts of legal technicalities created not by legislation, but by the judicial interpretations of appellate courts, seeking to remove even more remote dangers of injustice by creating injustice of crippling a society's ability to defend itself, even in the clearest cases of unquestioned guilt. Okay? It's just not right that people who are guilty are allowed to be free because of this cosmic vision for justice, this cosmic justice. But even if we could somehow miraculously acquire the omniscience to know all these things and how they interact in a complex way, we would still be left with the fact that changing rewards today changes incentives tomorrow, not just for those benefiting from unmerited good fortune, but for millions of others in the same society. Okay, our decisions today have consequences, and cosmic justice does not allow for you to pay attention to those costs, so you just make decisions without regarding what effect this will have on people. Like it talks about the lottery in and of itself is not going to cause the ripple effects like changing government policy and redistributing wealth. A person who wins the lottery, they're going to learn their lesson. If they haven't changed their behavior or they've never had good financial practices, they're not going to have that money for very long, whereas governmental policies will stay in effect regardless of who it's trying to reach. It's going to be long lasting. And we know that once something's enacted in government, it's really hard to get it undone. Society as a whole has more prosperity when it is more productive. Put differently, the injustice of such unmerited rewards can be corrected only at the cost of creating an injustice to millions of others who can become needlessly poor or fail to rise to the level of prosperity that existing technology and resources would permit. I mean, I will say injustice is that, my dad graduated high school and he worked his butt off until he was able to start his own company and was very successful at it. And it wasn't because it was fair the way he had to go about it. There were a lot of things that didn't happen fair in his life, but he overcame those and worked around them and didn't quit until he saw him achieve success. And when we try to make people equal, so say another Joe Blow wanted to do it but wasn't willing to do the work, it's not fair to my dad who did all the hard work to just have to be able to give away something to someone. And we know that sounds wrong. We know, even hearing that doesn't make any sense, that a person who wants to work hard should be successful and a person who doesn't want to put forth the effort is not going to be, right? That's how part of the problem is I think personally part of the problem is we have so many people in minimum wage paying jobs that were meant to be temporary starting places before they get into something that is more sustainable for their family life. We see that industry has expanded far, far more than I think it should have. Where we get people in places where they're successful and they're able to be more accomplished in what makes people feel like they have ownership in their success, I guess. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. All right, let's get back to someone's thoughts who are way more important than my thoughts. With justice, as with equality, the question is not whether more is better, but whether it is better at all cost. We need to consider what those who believe in the vision of cosmic justice seldom want to consider, the nature of those costs and how they change the very nature of justice itself. Okay, again, cosmic justice does not count the cost. It just decides what sounds good at the moment and what looks good and make people feel good. Even those who proclaim the principles of justice and call these principles more important than other benefits, as Professor Rawls does, seems unlikely to act on such principles in real life given the cost of doing so. I love this example. Imagine that a ship is sinking in the ocean with 300 passengers on board and only 200 life preservers. The only just solution is that everyone drowns, but most of us would probably prefer the unjust solution that 200 lives be saved, even if they are no more deserving than those who perish. We would probably prefer it even if we suspected that the most selfish and ruthless of those on board would probably end up with life preservers, right? We want injustice when it comes to stuff like that because it's not fair that someone should die, but it's better that 200 live than all 300 die. Yet the power of this concept was demonstrated by the fact that in the face of the gravest dangers, it prompted many to look back at the past instead of ahead to the future, which threatened the devastation of the continent and the slaughter of 10 millions of human beings and the attempted extermination of entire races. Okay, so what this is talking about, and I'll read it, the rest of this, is to say that what happened in World War I was that they wanted to try and right the wrongs that had happened beforehand, and it caused so much problems that I feel like what he says is it set up the situation for Hitler to rise to power because of how people felt it was so unjust, and they were wounded. Their pride was wounded that they were having to pay such, high price for something that they weren't even necessarily responsible for. And it says here, when it comes to social policy as well, some of those who consider themselves the most forward-looking are in fact most likely to look backward at history that is beyond anyone's power to change. As a historian writing about Czechoslovakia, for example, said the policies of the newly created state after the First World War were to correct social injustice and put to right the historic wrongs of the 17th century. Presumably, no one from the 17th century was still alive at the end of the First World War. One of the many contrasts between traditional justice and cosmic justice is that traditional justice involves the rules under which flesh and blood human beings interact, while cosmic justice encompasses not only contemporary individuals and groups, but also group abstractions extending over generations and even centuries. Nevertheless, it remains painfully clear that those people who, so now this is talking about slavery and reparations. First World War, we saw some examples of them trying to retroly take care of social injustices, and here we again have the same situation. Those people who were torn from their homes in Africa in centuries past and forcibly brought across the Atlantic in chains suffered not only horribly, but unjustly. Were they and their captors still alive, the reparations and retribution owed would be staggering. Time and death, however, cheat of such opportunities for justice, however galling that may be. We can, of course, create new injustices among flesh and blood contemporaries for the sake of symbolic expiation, so that the son or daughter of a black doctor or executive can go into elite college ahead of a son or daughter of a white factory worker or farmer, but only believers in vision of cosmic justice are likely to take moral solace from that. We can only make our choice among alternatives actually available, and rectifying the past is not one of those options. So, and it also talks about the Native Americans and the injustice they experienced when the Europeans came to America, and how it is too mixed up. You know, not only did they take over and conquer the land that the Native Americans were living on, they married and had children. And so now there's no way to separate. You can't separate that. It says nature is remarkably uncooperative with our moral categories. There's no way to unscramble an egg. So you can't even really put it back in place because it has so been meshed together that it is all part of the same history. And we have to let it go in order not to create more problems for those who have nothing to do with what happened in the past. Okay, statistical comparisons implicitly assume that the groups being compared are indeed comparable on relevant variables. Very often, however, they are not even close to being comparable. Close scrutiny. So sometimes I remember what I'm talking about. So this shifts over into the redlining law, the redlining issues where black people were restricted from getting houses in certain neighborhoods, is what they said. And, you know, there's a lot of misinformation that goes around with that. And I don't want to get into it. But what I want to talk to you about is just how, if you don't know all the information, you can be led to be upset about something that wasn't exactly presented as it really was. Okay, so closer scrutiny of the mortgage lending data, for example, shows that minority applicants for home loans had larger debt burdens, poorer credit histories, sought loans covering a higher percentage of the value of properties in questions, and were also more likely to seek financial multiple dwelling units rather than single-family homes, the former being considered the more risky investment. Even so, 70% of the minority mortgage loan applications were approved compared to 89% of the white mortgage loan applications. This is a 17 percentage point difference shrank to 6 percentage points when relevant variables were held constant. Moreover, all the remaining statistical difference could be traced to different loan approval rates at one bank. Why did the government not take legal action against this one white racist bank? Because it was neither white nor racist. It was a black-owned bank. Interesting detail that is not often mentioned. Statistical disparities, of course, are not limited to racial groups or to male-female differences. Moreover, believers in the quest for cosmic justice often confuse the fate of statistical abstractions with the fate of flesh and blood human beings. Much has been written, for example, about how small percentages of population receive large percentages of the nation's income or hold some large percentage of nation's wealth. The implicit assumption is that we're talking about classes of people when, in the United States at least, we are in fact often talking about individuals at different stages in their life. This is so important for us to grasp here, okay? The poor, who are often defined as the bottom 20% of income distribution, are as transient in that role as the rich. Only 3% of American population remained in the bottom 20% for as long as 8 years. More who began in the bottom 20% had reached the top 20% by the end of that period than remained where they were. Yet the poor continue to be identified as the bottom 20% instead of the 3% who remained at the bottom. Our intellectual discourse and our public policy are based on the statistical abstraction of 20% rather than flesh and blood 3% who are genuinely poor. The genuinely rich and the genuinely poor put together do not even add up to 10% of the American population. Yet these two marginal groups are the central characters in the moral melodramas which dominate American politics, journalism, and even academic and judicial discourse. Doesn't that kind of frustrate you? It frustrates me to know that we are talking about, because our economy and the way you're able to move around into it, that it is not likely for you to stay in that bottom tier because that's just the way it is. You're able to move out of it. So instead of talking about the 3% that are truly struggling, we include that to be more than it really is. And so many policies and things are focused on this small group of people. And I'm not saying they don't deserve help or it shouldn't be addressed, but I'm saying so much attention is paid to these people. And it goes the other end of the spectrum as well, as we'll see. let's see here. I think that is, let me get here. Here we go. All right, so let's go this next quote here. It's difficult to explain the fury and ruthlessness of those which this vision of cosmic justice, whenever they are challenged by the simple fact that they consider policy A to be better than policy B. What is at stake for them is not merely a policy option, but a whole vision of the world and their own place in that world. No wonder it is seldom possible to have rational discussions on some of these issues. It's hard to have discussions on people who are more concerned about how this policy makes them feel about their vision than the actual policy itself. Okay? All right. So here's this story about a dog. Let's see here. I think that's what I want. Okay, so there's this fable about a dog who's caught his bone and looks down in a lake and he sees another dog with a better bone and he's like, I want that bone. That dog shouldn't have that bone. So he goes to reach for the other bone, but unfortunately the bone drops out of his mouth and falls into water, and so he neither has the bone he had nor the bone he wanted. Okay? So let's see here. The cosmic justice is much like that illusionary bone, and it too can cause us to lose what attainable in the quest for the unattainable. And so much of this cosmic justice is not attainable. It's not real. Okay. All right. So let's see here. We're going to move on to the next essay, which is called The Mirage of Equality. And let's talk about how that looks. I think the title is very explanatory. There you go. And that it is a mirage. Equality is something that it's not something we can maintain. And I think he'll explain that pretty well. Okay, the abstract desirability of equality, like the abstract desirability of immortality, is beside the point when choosing what practical course of action to follow. What matters is what we are prepared to do, to risk or sacrifice in pursuit of what can turn out to be a mirage. Okay, even now, the most of the statistics that are thrown around concerning the rich and the poor are aggregate statistics about income strata as of a given moment, even though most Americans do not stay in the same quintile of income distribution for as long as a decade. Given this transience of membership in a various income brackets, it is possible to understand some otherwise puzzling statistics of the lifestyle of the poor. Politically or ideologically, of course, incentives are to maximize the number of people who can be counted as poor in justification of the movements or policies ostensibly aimed at reducing poverty. The radically different picture produced by the following actual flesh and blood human beings over time, as distinguished from looking at statistics for a given moment in time, applies not only to the poor, but also to the rich. Nevertheless, even with this generous definition, both the rich and the poor put together add up to less than 7% of the American population. Nevertheless, great political and ideological battles are often fought as if this were the central group in society rather than the other 93% who are in no meaningful sense either rich or poor. I just get so tired of these very, very small groups getting so much attention and focus, and we see it happen all the time. But it's because it stirs in us something to get us to respond, and a lot of times that manipulated response is to get us to do what they want. And we have to start waking up to the fact that they are totally wasting our time. And sadly, more and more, that's why I focus on Abilene in the big country, because I can't change DC. DC is messed up. And even the people that sound good, they still don't do anything. They still don't really change anything. They just kind of rearrange the chairs on a sinking ship. And I'm learning that there's trouble in our state as well. And so I can only get my city in order, my house in order. And once that takes place, then we can move forward and start changing the rest of the situation, because our government is set up to start local and go to the broader. And we got to get our federal system, the bicameral system, we got to get that back in order, back in its box. And we've given it too much power that we have to take back. And that comes from knowledge and wisdom. And God gives that to us when we ask for it. Okay. So let's see here. We'll go to the next one. All right, Western civilization. So this is talking about how Western civilization has, really just taken the best of different cultures and brought it in to make our world better, right? And so much of the story of the advancement of the human race has been a story of massive cultural borrowings, which have created a modern world technology as much as at home in Japan as in Europe or the United States. And we've taken it. And that's what, I've heard that, there was the quote, copying is the highest form of flattery, right? It's an honor to take someone's good idea and use it for yourself and make your world better, right? I even saw this video, I don't know, last week or so that was like, this girl was asking, how many braids can I wear in my hair without being doing culture appropriation? And another lady got on and said, you can wear one braid. That's the only one you will give you. Everything else is going to be, taking over. And it's like, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Cultures are supposed to make our world better. And that's part of our ethnic mixing, is that we take the best of both worlds and make society as a whole better. We don't go, all right, you keep that and you keep that and you can't have that because that's mine. Like that's so selfish. And we've made it another place of contention to divide us. And that's the greatest shame, in my opinion, that it divides us more than unites us. Virtually no one has seriously denied that discrimination and bias have resulted in various inequalities. It is a converse proposition that discrimination or bias can be inferred from statistical inequalities, which is the reigning non sequitur of our times, both intellectually and politically. To prove statistically that the observed patterns of representation or reward are not due to random chance is considered to be virtually proof that they are due to discrimination, not to performance differences. The implicit assumption is that more or less even random representation or reward for performance could be expected in the absence of institutional or societal policies and practices which disadvantage one group compared to others. Yet there has never been an even or random world, even in matters not controlled by the bias of others. Not only performance differences, but also differences in luck and in many other factors wholly disrupt the simple picture of even, regular, or balanced world. There's no way we can say that just because there's no implicit discrimination, implicit racism, I guess is what it really is. No, that's not, you can't just assume because you don't see it, it's there. You just can't do that. And we've allowed that to go on for far too long. I have 4 kids, and I wanted to be consistent and fair to each one of them. But even in families, there is no consistency. It says that it says if you cannot achieve equality performance among people born to the same parents and raised under the same roof, how realistic it's to expect to achieve it across broader and deeper social divisions. I can guarantee that my children have been raised differently, even though there's only like a 6.5-year difference between the birth of my first one to the birth of my last one. They're different. And it's not because I did it on purpose. It's because I tried to raise them. But as I grow and mature and as my circumstances change, things change, responses change. And it's interesting that we try and want to do that with our entire society. It's impossible. It is a vision that will never happen. It's unobtainable. Some people have claimed that groups also differ genetically in their intellectual position. So basically, it is sufficient to say that we have no need of that hypothesis. We don't even need to talk about intellectual potential. Nope, we're not even going to go there. The redistribution of income is not only an ideological corollary of the passion for equality, it shares similar qualities of moralistic loftiness and analytical vagueness and confusion. As a Fabian socialist, George Bernard Shaw defined socialism as a proposal to divide up the income of a country in a new way. However, most income cannot be redistributed because it was not distributed in the first place. It is paid directly for services rendered, and how much of it is paid is determined jointly by those individuals rendering the service and to those whom it is rendered. Okay? It also says this again, income is not distributed. It is directly earned in accordance to its values to others in light of competition for other available sources of the same service. So to say that government can come in and say, I'm going to take your money and give it to someone else, right? I mean, they already kind of do that with our taxes, but now they're going to come and try and do it. Well, they do it with our taxes. That's where they do it, That's a conversation for another day. Going to move on. Let's see here. All right. We are talking about collectivizing and politicizing the economic level of each individual. Where can that go well? All right. Where can that go well? All right. As with so many questions involving equality, the desired state of equality itself is not the real issue, especially since such a state of equality seems very unlikely to be achieved. What is crucial are the processes, remember that's traditional justice, set in motion in the hopes of approaching that state, to allow any governmental authority to determine how much money individuals shall be permitted to receive from other individuals produces not only a distortion of the economic processes by undermining incentives for efficacy, it is more fundamentally a monumental concentration of political power which reduces everyone to the level of a client of politicians. We don't want to be clients of politicians. Cultures have consequences. Ignoring those consequences while proclaiming equality as a self-justifying ideal does nothing to benefit the less fortunate, and in fact tend to freeze them into their backward position while the rest of the world moves forward. The bitter irony is all of this philosophical self-indulgence widens the empirical gap in the name of narrowing it. So we can't do anything without realizing the consequences. Some consequences are good, some consequences are bad. But remember, cosmic justice doesn't look at the cost. It just wants to fulfill the vision that is unattainable, sadly. All right. Let's see here. An even deadlier consequence of this quest for equality has been the development of non-judgmental attitude toward beliefs and behavior. One of the most important social lessons of parents to their children in previous generations was to avoid people with bad behavior and not to listen to them for fear of being fatally misled. Today's schools not only spend more time on classroom discussions of social behavior, they do so non-judgmentally. This means the idea of delinquents and hoodlums are put in the same place as ideas of students raised to the strictest moral standards. The only way to have equal respect is to have respect divorced from behavior and performance, which is to say, to have the word respect lose its meaning. Okay? We can take away all the standards to the point where it doesn't even, like we're setting everybody up to fail because we're not giving them the direction and the guidelines in order to be successful. All right. It is not simply that the poor may suffer psychically from having less than others from being encouraged to dwell on their current situation, rather than concentrating on improving it. The very terms of discussion encourage them to attribute their less fortunate positions to social barriers, if not political applause, and so to neglect the kinds of efforts and skills which are capable of lifting them to higher economic and social levels. It's cruel to not give people an out, to show them there's a way out, to let them stay stuck. That's really cruel and unusual punishment for anyone who knows that there's a better way to move forward. However, all these ways of advancing out of poverty can be short-circuited by an ideology of envy that attributes the greater prosperity of others to the exploitation of people like themselves, to oppression, bias, or unworthy motives such as greed, racism, and the like. The ideology of envy can make their own more successful members suspect as traitors. Thomas Sowell was considered a traitor. You name it, any person who succeeded out of this environment, they're considered traitors. They call them Uncle Toms. What such an ideology does essentially is paint the less fortunate in their own little corner, isolated from potential sources of greater prosperity. To the more fortunate, resistance or rebuffs to their attempts to help the less fortunate may be no more than a passing annoyance, but to the less fortunate themselves, this failure to acquire available human capital can be fatal to their own prospects. When you're not worried about the outcomes of what you do, then these things are what happen, because you make people's lives worse because you only care about pushing your agenda. All right. So the dog in manger attitude. So the dog in the manger is the horse wants to eat the hay, but the dog has come and sat on the hay in the manger, and then the horse can't do anything because the dog won't move. All right. Tax policies are often shaped by the desire to soak the rich, whether or not policies are beneficial to the overall economy or even to the government's tax receipts. One of the most bitterly resented policies of the Reagan administrations were the tax rate reductions referred as tax cuts for the rich. Even though tax rates in general were cut, the government's tax receipt rose after rates were cut and income rose, and the upper income brackets not only paid more total taxes, but even a higher percentage of all taxes. So it makes me think when people say, oh, we're just going to tax the rich, it's actually a distraction to mean we're going to make the rich not have to pay as much. But actually, it's even worse than that. Higher taxes, taxing the rich, really causes a trickle-down effect, because the rich know how to reposition their money so they don't have to pay the taxes, and therefore they stop doing the things to actually grow their income, and that affects everyone downward. And so it's proven fact that when you decrease taxes, the revenues do go up for the government. So why are we doing that? Makes me think there's another agenda at play. Okay. And then they say estate taxes, everybody talks about it, but it's such a small problem in our government that they use it as a distraction to blow for the political purpose of striking a blow against the inherited wealth. All right. Since the whole reason, let's see here. I'm going to look at this page because I don't want to. All right. Similar reasoning has promoted educational policies which seek to create more equal outcomes for special education students with mental, physical, or psychological handicaps, again, with little or no regard for financial cost of this to the taxpayers or educational cost to other children in whose classrooms they are to be mainstreamed, often with little regard to disruptive effects of their special needs. These financial costs can be several times what it costs to educate the average student, while the educational results for severely mentally retarded student may be imperceptible. The educational cost can also include substantial part of a teacher's time being devoted to one or few students to neglect the majority. Okay? All right, and that is why we took our kids out of school. That was one of the big reasons why, because the majority were being neglected for a small minority, and I was told that my child didn't matter. And I couldn't believe that was coming from an educator. And, we prayed about it, so we didn't do it right away, but it was eye-opening to realize that if you didn't toe the line or do exactly what they wanted, they were going to punish you. And that's not what education was about. And so we gladly pulled them out and I have not regretted it since, for sure. All right. More broadly, ability grouping in different classes or in different schools is bitterly opposed by most public school officials on similar grounds. In short, both the mentally gifted and the mentally retarded are to be mainstreamed as part of the quest for cosmic justice, with little or no regard for the cost of this for the students, the taxpayers, or the society in which they are to go as adults. Okay? You disregard effects of third parties are also common on such issues as tax, price controls, and law enforcement. Tax issues are not simply about whether one class pays more for another, but also about the repercussions of particular kinds of taxes on economic development and national employment, which affect everyone. All right? So, there's always negative effects to when you're trying to control things that aren't meant to be controlled. All right. The welfare state, let's see here. I take that back. Yeah, this is, they just treat society as problematic. And so they try to remove all form of society, like titles, mother and father, and give people the authority to be able to speak on things. It's just problematic, and it doesn't give us the opportunity to be able to use those positions of authority in ways that help guide us and get us into a better position. When you strip those away, then people are just kind of stuck where they're at, and I think they're okay with that. Okay, the welfare state, however, has made many of the respectable self-supporting poor look like chumps, as the government has lavished innumerable programs on those who violate all the rules and refuse to take responsibility for themselves. Now the incentives are reversed, tempting some of the respectable poor to take advantage of benefits available to those who are to live without work, without saving for the future, and even having to pay for a roof over their heads. Not a good situation, for sure. The crucial question is not whether reducing or eliminating envy is a desirable goal, any more than the question is whether cosmic justice is desirable. In both cases, the question is, what is the cost of promoting this goal? We all may agree on equality before the law, and religious people can agree that we are all equal in the sight of God. It is a fatal step from equal regard to equal performance, or presumably equal performance, in the absence of social barriers that opens the door to disaster. All right. We're about to wrap this up here. Last one. Let me read here. One of the ways which the dogma of equal performance is a threat to freedom is its need to find villains and sinister machinations to explain why the real world is so different from the world of its vision. Courts of law condemn people for discrimination because the even or random distribution of people found in theory that cannot be found in fact. The very thought of condemning the theory or even testing it by evidence seems unthinkable. If there are fewer women than men in engineering schools, then this is automatically assumed to be evidence that engineering schools discriminate against women. If this or that racial or ethnic group is underrepresented here or there, this is considered virtual proof of racism. Again, it's not evidence-based. It's only that they have to promote the vision. And so we're going to end this. This is the second essay, and we're going to pause here because I want to be able to continue. And I think we've reached the max capacity for most people to sit this long and listen to this discussion, or at least some points brought out from The Quest for Cosmic Justice by Thomas Sowell. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast today. This episode has been really interesting and eye-opening to me, even though I've read most of this before. Please feel free to subscribe and share this with your family and friends so they can make sure they're a part of this great conversation. And better yet, have discussions about this. Read the book, check it out, and see how you can begin to have more discussions that create opportunities to really make changes so that we don't get stuck in this rut of this cosmic justice that has been pushed upon us for so long. So until next time, look forward to discussing part 2 of The Quest for Cosmic Justice.